the anti-establishment party arguably got into power, right? So they are actually more aligned with Bitcoin. So I think we often forget that someone like Trump, for example, was from outside of the system.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Coin Stories podcast. I'm Natalie Brunell, and joining me is my good friend, author, entrepreneur Aleks Svetski, who just put out his latest book, The Bushido of Bitcoin. We're going to be talking all about it. So, Aleks, thanks for joining me. How are you?
Nat, good to see you again, honey. It's been ages. It's been like what, 2 years since we caught up, I
I
think.
know it's been forever because you moved to this remote place in Brazil. So, first of all, can you share with the audience and with me how life is there? Why'd you move there? What are you doing out there?
Wow, man, that's a big question. We moved for many reasons. One, wanting to be close by the beach, and number two, I like the southern hemisphere weather a little bit better. Number three, it was easy from a visa perspective, and particularly at the time, things were a little bit crazy in the US. I mean, now that Trump's won, I've got a lot of hope for the US, but my intention was to sort of be away from that part of the world at the time. And yeah, we just wanted to, I wanted to put my head down and work for a little bit. And I felt when I was in the center of things, I'd be distracted with, I don't know, everything from meetups to conferences to this to
Mm.
that, which are very effective, I think, in some ways. What networking, sorry, is sometimes antithetical to actually getting work done. So I think it's the old saying where people say networking is no working or something like that. So yeah, it gave me a chance to get away and make myself useful again, recuperate, and yeah, that's why I'm down here.
Well, I can appreciate that because so many people tried to get me to move to Austin when I was thinking of leaving LA. And I knew that if I moved to a Bitcoin city, that I would just constantly be getting pulled
Yeah.
into Bitcoin events, which are great. But I also just kind of wanted a little bit of a quiet life. So I moved to St. Louis. But I mean, when I think of Brazil, actually, especially in the last year, I think of upheaval. I think of censorship by the government and their own chaos. So I don't understand. I mean, you left one political mess just for another, didn't you?
Not really. So, I mean, I think Twitter always just gives people this view that everything that's online is somehow real. Like, nothing actually happened. No one gave a shit. Anyone who felt censored on Twitter just got a VPN and got around it. And in
Mm.
the end, it was, that meme that nothing ever happens. It's exactly that. The chud that says nothing ever happens, because that's basically what happened. Nothing, and it's fine.
Oh.
Like these places are large enough and dysfunctional enough where the overreach of the state doesn't really affect anybody on a day-to-day basis.
Mm.
If had I not seen the fiasco on Twitter, I would not have known a single thing about it.
Wow. Okay. Well, I guess I had a different impression of it. I know Glenn Greenwald lives out in Brazil. I really hope to meet him someday and have him on the show. But okay, let's talk about your book,
All
The
right.
Bushido of Bitcoin.
Mhm.
Let's start very simply for people who look at this word and they're like, what is Bushido? I mean, this is like an old code of conduct from Japan, right? Tell us about it.
Yeah. So the word means way of the warrior, and the closest Western equivalent is chivalry, and essentially it emerged. It's not like a Ten Commandments, right, or anything like that. It's not something that's written. It was a way of being, or a code of conduct for the warrior class in Japan, and it emerged over time, right? So it was sort of like passed down from generation to generation as the way a warrior must act. So you were there was the samurai class, which was the equivalent to the knight class in the West, and you were born as a samurai, so it was a biological genetic thing, and they were fundamentally also very different people. They were different to the peasants, they were different to the merchants. They were more rugged, they were larger in stature, they more had the blood of a kind of person who could kill and who could wage war, right? So it was very different kind of class of person, and Europe had that as well. In fact, that was the norm across every single type of people around the world. Over the last couple hundred years, we've sort of mixed all the bloodlines, but that's another story. So being the warrior class, being the protectorate, being what you could call like the white blood cells of the organism of society. They could be when um, when unconstrained, there was a tendency for warriors to over um, extend themselves in a sense. Like they could be brutal, they could be vile, they could do things that were antithetical to the structure of civilization. So what you had was this kind of like moral code that emerged as a way of self-governance, because they knew that they were the strongest. And what happened was the lower classes, so the peasants, the merchants, the artisans, and all this sort of stuff, would look up to the warrior class, and because they were the sort of the example of the protectors of their society, their civilization. You couldn't have merchants, warriors, artisans. You couldn't have any of that without some sort of line protecting the inner society, right? And this is, I think, a lot of libertarians, a lot of the West, the modern West, has forgotten that. Is like, commerce is not the fundamental language. Force is the fundamental language. So uh, you need to delineate, you need to create boundaries through the capacity for force or violence. So anyway, that's sort of what they represented. So the lower classes looked up to them, and the upper classes, the aristocrats and the aristocracy, sorry, and the royalty, depended on them for protection and for establishing the boundaries, etc. So what ended up happening was, in Japan, the Bushido kind of became the code, and it became this sort of like embedded cultural expectation or norm. Like it permeated every other class. And in the same way, in the West, you had chivalry sort of permeated the lower and upper classes as well. So what I found in writing the book, and I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but basically the warrior classes were the ones that set the tone, and especially the healthier warrior classes, whether it was in Japan, whether it was in Christian Europe, whether it was in Rome, whether it was in Greece, Macedonia, all the great cultures and all the great civilizations, the code of conduct for generally the entirety of civilization was set by the warrior class, which was a very interesting finding for me.
Coin Stories is proudly brought to you by Bitdeer, a global leader in disruptive technology for Bitcoin mining and AI. As a publicly traded leader, Bitdeer boasts a massive 2.5 gigawatts of electrical capacity and infrastructure under development across 3 continents, positioning Bitdeer as one of the most diversified and power-dense computing companies in the world. Bitdeer's leadership pioneered the original advancements in Bitcoin mining ASICs and is now poised to disrupt the market again with groundbreaking new designs for the next generation of mining ASICs that are targeted to reach efficiencies of as low as 5 joules per terahash by late next year. Now they're leveraging years of expertise in data center and cloud management into high-performance computing through a partnership with NVIDIA. Join Bitdeer in reshaping the world of Bitcoin mining. Learn more at bitdeer.com and explore how they are pioneering the future today. I want to dig into something because when I listen to you, I actually hear a lot of contradicting themes or something that is intuitively contradicting. For example, the idea of aristocracy, refinement, morality, restraint versus warrior, war, violence, force. Some would equate that with, savagery, barbarism. How do these two things blend together to you? Because I feel like you're talking about this sophisticated, restrained warrior who does not exude force or violence.
It's not, he does not. He chooses not to. So this is the most important thing, and I think Peterson talks a little bit about this, right? Is like the non-dangerous man, the weak man, is the fundamentally the evil man, because he's the one that has the jealousy and resentment because he cannot do anything. So a good mental imagery to have on this is, you're strong if you can swing a hammer and stop the hammer from crushing the egg, right? Like the weak man would swing it and end up crushing the egg. The strong man can swing it and he can stop it, right? So real strength, and Breedlove and I had a really deep discussion about this on a podcast about 6 months ago, whatever it was. And what I told him about, like, the true definition of strength is not punching down, but it's punching up, right? Like, you don't get into a ring. Like, if you and I got into a ring and I beat you up, that's not, that's not a sign of strength on my part, right? Like, that is actually a sign of weakness. Or if I get into a ring with someone, let's say the same strength as me, and I spike his water or something and drug him so that I can beat him, I didn't win because I was stronger or better. I won because I cheated, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this sort of, like, the capacity for violence, like, underlies everything. Like, there is, like, it's the one communication modality that every single species, human or non-human, understands. Simple as that. Like, if you really, like, take it to the nth degree, right? That doesn't mean that we should operate around violence. It's not the point. The point is, though, that underlies it. And the capacity to use it, the capacity to channel it, requires a particular stature, a particular posture, a particular energy, and being able to channel that is effectively what a warrior does, right? Like, it's, and that's the opening quote of the book is, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war, right?
Yep.
Is the capacity for that is more important.
So, how do you see Bitcoin helping us maybe build a world with more warriors who are peaceful? Where, because I think a lot of people look at the situation right now, especially even geopolitically, and they're afraid of like World War III happening. Could Bitcoin actually make us have a peaceful world, but with more strong men and women?
I don't know about peaceful. I think peaceful is a bit of a red herring. I don't think life is about peace. I've come to realize that. I mean, even like, think about what a creative process is. Creativity is not peaceful. Creativity, by definition, is about destroying something and creating something new. Like, there is none of this, like, oh, peace and love, and everyone's going to be fine, and rose-colored glasses. And Bitcoin doesn't somehow eliminate conflict. Like, there's an entire section in the book where I talk about the necessity for conflict. Like, the very act of, like, for example, coming into this world is a brutal, violent process. Like, you don't just, like, you're not born with roses and shit. Like, it's not a nice, clean, peaceful process. Like, war and violence is a part of life, and the more we try and separate ourselves from it, the more we actually weaken ourselves. When people talk about, oh, the West is declining, the birth rate is declining, testosterone is falling, it's not just because of the microplastics, right? It's not just because of the blue light on our phones. It's because we're not called upon to push ourselves anymore. We are separated, or we distance ourselves from the necessary violence and struggle and everything. So we numb ourselves. This stuff about depression and anxiety and all this sort of stuff, they're all scams. Like, you're not depressed. Your body is giving you a signal that you're being a bitch, like, or that you are being soft, or that you're not living up to your standards, right? So it creates these chemicals in your body and pushes you to do something about it. So what do we do in our stupid ass society? We're like, oh, well, here's some antidepressants so that you can numb the signals that your body is giving you to do something about this feeling of anxiety, depression, whatever the case is, right? So, in my opinion, like, Bitcoin maybe sharpens, like, through an economic means, and we can discuss how this happens, but sharpens the violence in such a way that it's more like surgical violence, or tactical violence, or directed violence, than mindless, stupid violence, right? Like, going to World War III and wiping out half the planet is completely ridiculous, right? But, for example, and I don't know, some people are probably not going to like this, but let's say doing a remigration policy in Europe and America, and, like, throwing a bunch of people out, that is going to be a violent process, but it's absolutely necessary violence, right? And it needs to happen in order for these countries to maintain their ethnicity, their culture, their safety, and all this sort of stuff. So my hope, and I don't know how much Bitcoin helps this, other than maybe the people who hold some Bitcoin have the courage and the capacity to um, develop themselves, or develop the warrior element of themselves. Because you need, like, to change anything, you need character and capital. Capital alone is not enough. If you got capital with no character, you end up being right? So if you've got capital and character simultaneously, you might have the capacity to affect change. And my hope is that Bitcoin and the maybe what it does in lowering time preference and stuff like that, and the fact that there is this Bitcoin community that's adjacent to communities that want to be more holistic, sound, traditional, all this sort of stuff. I think that relationship there somewhat leads us to a place where maybe we can use violence in a more directed capacity instead of in a moronic, stupid capacity.
So, Aleks, you sometimes lean into topics that are a little bit more controversial and maybe a little bit they ruffle some feathers, which I think is totally fine, and I love to explore this. But in your book, I mean, someone who I don't consider to be controversial wrote the foreword, and that was Ross Stevens. And so I just want to know how that happened, because he wrote a very powerful foreword about how he agrees with a lot of your thesis in this, and how we should have this kind of new code of conduct and code of morality through Bitcoin. So how did you get him to write the foreword?
Well, I mean, Ross and I don't want to call it pen pals, but we've been sort of writing back and forth for a little while. And he was one of the big supporters of the Bitcoin Times when I was doing that.
Mm.
And I approached him with this about, I think it was around the time when I first came to Brazil. I reached out to him and asked if he would actually write just a recommendation of the book. So I sent him an early draft, and he was like, "This is fantastic. I love where you're going with this. Obviously, needs a lot of work because the first draft was, in my opinion, like a disaster. I wrote this book 8 times, just for the record, like literally
Wow.
8 times. It was insane, and I was like, no worries, I'll come back to you with something better. I came back to him with I think the third or fourth draft about a year later, and he's like, this is amazing. This is so much better. And then I said, would you do me the honor of writing the foreword? Because Eric Kaysen was actually supposed to originally write the foreword. And then I was like, Eric, I'm sorry, but I got Ross writing the foreword, so I'm going to dunk it. He goes, I can't blame you. So that's basically how it ended up happening. And yeah, I got Ross the almost final version. I think it was draft 7 or 7.5, basically. And yeah, he read it again. He wrote that forward, and that's how we're here.
Well, that's pretty awesome. He is someone who I deeply respect in the space. He speaks out very infrequently. So when he does say something, you pay attention. I love his investors' letters that he writes for NYDIG. So props to you for getting him to write the forward. Okay, so you have chapters on everything from respect to responsibility to wealth. But there's one that I want to focus on for a little bit, which is, can Bitcoin help? Can the economic incentives of Bitcoin create a world where we have more virtue, we have more of the qualities that you see in some of these codes of conduct? How do you see those two worlds evolving?
My answer is a little bit inconclusive because I'm not sure it helps on its own. Kind of similar to what I said earlier, right? Is people need to, like, I no longer believe that Bitcoin fixes this. I think that's a stupid message. I think it's very naive, and if anything, the evidence that I've seen over the last couple of years, as I've been a little bit outside of the Bitcoin space, is more often than not, most people who end up with Bitcoin and become wealthy become degenerates. It's a very, very, very small subset that quote unquote become virtuous. And my guess is that those people already had the ingredients that made them predisposed to be like that anyway. Bitcoin might have just been a little bit of a catalyst. It didn't somehow fix them. It didn't somehow make them better, right? So that's number one. Number two is I've also been outside of the Bitcoin space and making friends in new communities, like the dissident right. Like I've been down the Substack rabbit hole, and my editor of the book, John Carter, and stuff like that, is absolutely fantastic. I have found a level of intellect, a level of courage, a level of respect, a level of character 10,000 times more powerful than the Bitcoin space. Like I have zero interest in like really being part of the Bitcoin space anymore outside of like a few people, honestly. Like I found my tribe outside of it, and none of them are Bitcoiners, which is the really interesting thing. So it proved to me that Bitcoin isn't the thing that somehow fixes everybody. My goal was to actually reach out to that audience specifically and show them that, hey, you guys have this major character. Like you guys are way deeper thinkers. what you need as well is the capital, and Bitcoin is the most powerful form of capital. And what I also wanted to do was show the Bitcoiners that, hey, you guys have a bunch of capital, but if you don't build the character with that, it's meaningless. You're just more prone to become a degenerate. And I think I'm trying to bridge these two worlds. And I don't know if anyone's tried to do that. I mean, I know there's like, people like Seyfedin and I, we see the world very eye to eye, but Seyfedin's taken a real economic approach to why Bitcoin. I tried to do something very different here, which is about culture, civilization, behavior, psychology. Like that's what I wrote the book for, as opposed to, oh, rye stones and the evolution of money. I don't care about that.
Well, you argue in the book that one of the greatest evils of our time is equality. Can we dig into that a little bit? Because one word that I've heard describe Bitcoin is it's a more egalitarian system, that it will level the playing field, that we won't see the kind of wealth concentration that so many people have been frustrated with because they don't think that that wealth was amassed in a fair way. So how do you view equality?
Yeah, so I think we need to make first a real distinction between equal and fair, right? So fair is one thing, and equal is something completely different. In fact, they're diametrically opposed. When you have a fair game, for example, you generally have an unequal outcome, right? You want one winner, one loser, right?
Hmm.
Um, if you want equality, you generally have to make things unfair, which is
Hmm.
you need to bring down the winner and you need to raise up the loser, right? And this distinction is really, really important. And while Bitcoin might level the playing field, that's not about equality. That's about instituting fairness in the economic game, right? It's that we're playing by the same rules, so we make cheating less likely, and we will still end up with unequal outcomes, which is fantastic because that's what we want. You want the best to get better, and you want the worst to lose. And you want there to be some sort of mechanism which reinforces, economically speaking, the people who do the work, who do the right thing, who are more productive, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, we all kind of know this, but we label it with stupid things like egalitarianism and stuff like that. That's not what it is. It's about fairness, and fairness is brutal. Honestly, like it's sometimes you see people and they put everything into something and they lose, but it was a fair result, and
Hmm.
you'll have people out there be like, oh well, you know what, we should just like give them a medal anyway. It's like, well, no, I mean, sorry, life is tough sometimes, and sometimes these things happen. If people want to, out of their own volition, for example, give or help with the loss or whatever, that's up to them. But fundamentally, like a fair world will still have massive inequality, and that's not a bad thing.
Well, I do agree with you in many ways. I don't think actually that if we had true capitalism and that we had a unit of account like Bitcoin at the foundation of our global economy, that we would see some of the levels of wealth concentration that we do. I actually think that there would be a more robust middle class like there once was. And I think that the incentives have broken down to a point where people that are able to be close to the money printer through the Cantillon effect, they're able to generate more and more, and that ultimately does end up impoverishing everyone else to the point that everyone feels like no matter how hard they work, they can't get ahead, which has its own mental roadblocks that I think it,
Mhm.
it gives people, because it's like, well, why would I work hard, or why would I be the perfect citizen and the perfect model of character, because no matter what I do, I can't get ahead. And I think that it puts such a pressure on society that the only thing that could fix it and that could uplift the most amount of people in a fair way is a hard money at the core. Like, do you agree with that? Do you think that the world would be a place where there isn't so many such a disparity, I guess, between the haves and the have-nots, and there would be more people in the middle? This episode is brought to you by Casa. As some of you know, I recently updated my self custody, and Casa makes self custody so easy, even if you've never held your own keys or used multisig before. Casa has a state of the art app and live experts standing by to guide you every step of the way. For those with large Bitcoin holdings, Casa just rolled out a new service. It now offers a holistic security advisory service. As a private client, you'll get a 7-step security overhaul, personalized consulting, and your own private emergency line for expert help when you need it most. Get 10% off your Casa plan at casa.io/Natalie. Next up, Speed, the fastest growing Lightning wallet in the world. Send and receive Bitcoin, swap with stable coins, and even snag gift cards to earn rewards, all in seconds. Download Speed via the QR code or the link in my show notes and use code CoinStories10 for 5,000 free sats. And finally, are you ready to take control of your wealth? The Bitcoin Way is here to empower you. Learn how to take full self custody and eliminate all counterparty risk. Set up a node and become the master of your own transactions and enjoy true autonomy. And upgrade your cybersecurity and protect your online privacy like I did. The Bitcoin Way specializes in personalized one-on-one training to help you become fully self-sovereign. Schedule a free consultation today. All right, back to the show.
I half agree, right? So there's an entire section in the book around that area of what you're talking about. I think it's part 3 of the book in the integration section around can Bitcoin help? And in there, I talk about like 4 games, right? Like, so you have the game of being as close as possible to the monetary spigot. You have the game of being extremely entrepreneurial and having proximity to it. You have the game of being middle class and being disillusioned. And then you have the game of giving up, right? Like there's sort of 4 games. And I outline what those players each do and what happens on the current fiat standard versus what might happen on a Bitcoin standard, where you end up with probably 3 players instead of the 4. So I agree with it to the extent that it's important to get that piece right. What I don't agree is that it's the only thing that's necessary. There's other things that need to happen, which are just as important, maybe not more important, but I would say just as important, which if we only got the money right, we wouldn't get the rest of it right. So one example is like, we need to absolutely abolish democracy. Like the idea that everybody can have a vote is the dumbest idea on the face of the planet. That has never worked. It will never work. It is a cancer in civilization, and it needs to be fundamentally abolished. Otherwise, no matter how good we get the money printing component, the fact that people who are not productive have the same say as people who are productive will fundamentally erode civilization and will get you back to the money printer anyway. Like that's like it. You can't have the economic fix without the cultural fix and the political fix. Like those 2 things are also fundamentally just as important. So that's where I half agree. Bitcoin does help, but it's definitely not the only thing. That's the big aha moment. Because I mean, you remember I wrote the Uncommunist Manifesto, and in there, that's exactly what I talk about, like a bigger middle class and all this sort of stuff. And we talked about in the book, like how right now we've got a distribution of like 99 1%, right? Like, so it's the 1% of everything, the 99% have
Yeah.
nothing. And that is an unnatural distribution. Whereas
Completely.
we want to get back to like 80-20, because 80-20 is a Pareto principle. It works universally, biologically, all this sort of stuff. But it's not enough. Like you need to have the 80-20 in politics and culture as well. You can't just do the economic 80-20. You have to have the other stuff. And Bitcoin alone doesn't fix that. That's really important to understand.
You introduced a term in the book that I hadn't heard before, interregnum, like this
Uh-huh.
transitional period with 2 opposing forces. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it's interesting to see us be in a time now where the United States is talking about embracing Bitcoin, when really for so many Bitcoiners, it was like this anti-establishment network. And now all of a sudden the politicians love it. This is one of Peter Schiff's arguments of the last week, that now Bitcoin's corrupt because it needed all the politicians to love it for it to go to 100,000. But how do you see these 2 worlds colliding also? Because it's like the old world, the legacy system and legacy finance and all that it's built on, and this system of decentralization and freedom. And now I guess they're going to be blended.
Well, they're not going to be blended. So the anti-establishment party arguably got into power, right? So they are actually more aligned with Bitcoin. So I think we often forget that someone like Trump, for example, was from outside of the system. He wasn't a career politician. He was a businessman first, right? Like that's what he did first, and he comes from outside of the system. And his first round of politics wasn't that effective because of the way the system or the swamp functions. There's like, you come from a business paradigm where you can call the shots and do things. You enter a political paradigm, and all of a sudden you're drowning in a swamp, and you're sort of dealing with molasses to try and make changes, and it doesn't work. Right now, his second term looks like so far is off to a fantastic start, and he's going to do, at least in my opinion, way more good than what he did before. But that alignment, like, are we seeing Bitcoin sort of fuel the anti-establishment transformation of the establishment, right? Are we seeing that? And
Like a Trojan horse.
you could call it a Trojan horse, or you could call it like a transformation. So the way I kind of look at America right now is a little bit more like Rome in like 50 AD, sorry, 50 BC, somewhere around there, which is the Republic fell, but what came up was the Roman Empire, which then had a couple hundred years of a golden age. It too ended up falling as well and being subsumed by something else. But my guess is actually America's about to enter a golden age. And I think this transformation, this movement towards strong leadership and movement away from the stupidity that is democracy, I think is very healthy. And that's like where we should be going. So to tie that back to the interregnum, the interregnum is a little bit more broad than that, generally speaking. What it means is the time between kings. And what I talk about in the book is more of an economic interregnum, which is fiat was king, or US dollar, basically, because you can every other fiat is a proxy to the US dollar. And then you have Bitcoin on this side, the day that it will be king. And the day that it's king is the day that fiat's dead. And then you have the alternate, which is pre-2008, fiat existed and Bitcoin didn't. Everything between that, I don't know if that's a 50-year period, if it's a 100-year period, if it's a 200-year period, I don't know. Everything between that is a transition phase where different rules apply. So on a Bitcoin standard, my argument is that you need to be more courageous, more compassionate, more respectful. You have to have greater restraint. You have to behave with all of the virtues that I outline in the book. That's why I call the book a playbook for a world under a new socioeconomic standard. That's the playbook there. But the playbook on a fiat standard, you need to lie, cheat, steal, parasite your way, politic your way into like leeching from the system. So these two values, or these two modes of being, or these two methods of acting, they're going to clash during this interregnum. And that's going to mean it's going to be the messiest period, but it's also going to be the period of the most opportunity, right? Like the people who can navigate that period are going to establish, I believe, the dynasties and the kingdoms of the future. Because we are 100% moving back towards kingdoms. Like this whole little deviation that we've had in civilization, where we sort of killed off all the royalty and we moved away from kings and queens, like it's a very small detour, and civilization is going to go back to what is natural, which is kings, queens, aristocracy, and everything like that. That's where we're going, and that's what Bitcoin's going to send us to.
Have you read the book Sovereign Individual?
Of course, yeah, 100 times.
Doesn't it argue that we're going to move into a more decentralized world where the individual is sovereign rather than these systems of governance where ultimately the power is so concentrated? Because that's what I think of when I think of a monarchy
No,
or an aristocracy.
there's no such thing as a sovereign individual. That's that's a LARP. Like that's like a ridiculous thing that we've all kind of lied to ourselves to. You can have an autonomous individual to some degree, but a sovereign implies the capacity to protect a territory, right? Like you can't do that as an individual. It's an absolute stupidity. So you can strive to be as autonomous as possible, but as an individual, you'll always have some sort of dependency or some sort of co-relationship with others, right? And the king is the individual with the most autonomy. And he, with his people together, can establish sovereignty around a territory. That's where you want to go, and that's where you need to end up if you want to have some level of sovereignty. But for example, Bukele is the king of Salvador for all intents and purposes. He's not the president. Like the president is just a stupid excuse for what he should be. Like he should just be given, he should just be established as the king forever in Salvador and just like rule that country into prosperity, right? Like that's what I mean when I talk about like a leadership position or a king or a monarch, right? Like, or a true sovereign. But, the average individual and sort of this idea that somehow individuals are going to be ultimately sovereign, it's a fantasy. That doesn't work like that. Human beings are interdependent.
I'll be interested to see what the reaction is to this because I had Saif on when he released the fiat standard. And towards the end of that interview, he talked about how he sees the ideal form of government as a monarchy.
Yes.
And he actually thinks that it incentivizes the most long-term thinking. You're thinking about your heirs, and you want to establish the most prosperity. And so many of my viewers and listeners, they disagreed with it. They thought absolutely not, that concentrates the power. It leads to corruption. So it's very interesting to hear you have very similar views, because so many people, fought for us to not have that system and to have a system of democracy. And people are, I
Yeah,
think,
we got lied
arguably
to.
so mad right now because there are no term limits. They want to get these corrupt people out of office. So anything
No,
you
we got
just want
lied
to
to.
share?
Yeah, we got lied to. That was the thing. Like the all this stuff about the concentration of power is bad. It's not bad. No, it's not. First of all, second of all, it's like the democracies are way more corrupt than monarchies are. Like they're prone for corruption because you've got this like multi-headed hydra where nobody is actually responsible for anything, and you create space for corruption. Now, every kind of system can be corrupted. That's like, this isn't me or Seyfried saying that monarchies are perfect. It's not the case, right? Like, so you can corrupt any kind of leadership organization, but we don't run companies by democratic decision making, right? You have a CEO, you have a board, you have a management structure, and you have a pointy end, right? There is a CEO that directs the goddamn thing. That is effective. Like, if we started running companies and economics through a democratic fashion, we would go bankrupt. And that's why every single democracy is bankrupt. Like, that's what happens. Like, it is the dumbest form of operation on the planet. And everything that we got lied to basically in school and in the media and all this sort of stuff over the last 60, 70 years since World War II primarily was that royalty bad, monarchy bad. It was all like this psyop to try and create this like wipeout of that form of living when that established everything that we benefit from in the West today. Simple as that. Now, republics are more monarchy like than they are democracy like, fundamentally, because you have an aristocratic class, and you have the president, who's a little bit more like a king than a prime minister is. So there's a bunch of, I don't know if we don't have time to unpack it all, but I'm 100% in the in agreement with Seyfried. Like, this is a big area that he and I naturally agree on, and I think it's funny to me that it's a contrary opinion, but the best part is that Bitcoin is actually going to just bring that to life. And all the democracy screechers are just going to be sitting there like crying their eyes out because their democracy is going to get abolished in the process.
Yeah, I think this is definitely going to spark some debate for sure for people who listen. All right, before we start to wrap up, I just want to go back to Bushido,
Mhm.
the way of the warrior, and these values, these virtues that it does stand for: courage, honor, loyalty, integrity, self control. How do people that are reading your book or watching this, how do they maybe take that as an inspiration to implement that in their own lives, to be someone of character and virtue?
So let me first say something about virtue. So the reason I didn't write a book that was a moral code, but a code of virtue, was because I don't want to moralize to anyone. Like, if people want a moral code, they can go read the Bible, the Quran, whatever, right? Like, they're more about morality and about your beliefs, right? A virtue to me is a action or a way of being. So, like, if you think of values as something that you desire, a virtue is something you do to get what you value, right? So if you want the value of freedom, like, freedom is not a virtue. I have a whole chapter in the book about that. Freedom is a value which you acquire through the virtue of responsibility, right? That's how you get to freedom. So virtues are things we do. So you can kind of think of a virtue almost as like a principle meets a behavior, right? That conception together is what a virtue is. Now, virtues transcend beliefs. You can have a Muslim with a Christian, with atheists, with all that sort of stuff. All of them can recognize the virtue of courage, or the virtue of compassion, or the virtue of honesty, or the virtue of self-restraint, right? So virtues is something that I think, if I'm right, and it seems to me that I'm right, this isn't Svetski's virtues. These are the virtues that the greatest cultures who built the greatest civilizations seem to coalesce around, right? Like they map over each other, even though these cultures and civilizations existed at different times in different places in different geographies, etc. Right? if we can find some alignment amongst those, I think we can find alignment amongst even people with different belief systems. So that's like sort of first of all something that I want to tell people, and why I wrote a code of virtue, not a moral code. Second of all, to develop these things, I mean, I've got a whole section in the book called Praxis, which says, okay, now that we've got all these and we understand what integration looks like what the hell do we do? Honestly, like as with any behavior, as with any skill, as with anything that you want to develop in yourself, it's about action. Like there's a whole section in the book about training, and training physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, all this sort of stuff. Like you need to train yourself. Like if you want to develop courage, you need to put yourself in a position or in a situation where you need to be courageous. You don't develop courage by reading a book, right? If you want to develop honesty, you need to be honest when it's hard to be honest. If you want to develop responsibility, you need to take on more responsibility. You need to carry more of the weight of responsibility. So all of these things, virtues are action oriented. They are only things that you can develop through action. And so that would be my comment to anyone who's interested in establishing or developing these things.
I love that. That's a really powerful message. I feel like so many people out there, they deal with shame. And I think the only way that you build self-esteem is by doing esteemable things. And sometimes
Correct.
that could
Yeah.
be the toughest thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but to your point, only action will change that and create a pattern that will become a behavior. Well, this is awesome to have you back. It's always so fascinating. We dive into some very philosophical things that I wish we could explore for hours. But I hope everyone checks out your book. We'll link it in the show notes. Any final thoughts?
No, that's it. I mean, thank you for having me on. I know I'm controversial. I know I kind of like push people on things, and there's a bunch of these rabbit holes which genuinely need further elaboration, and it's very hard in a short podcast to kind of like go down all of these rabbit holes. So I encourage people, like, you can get free chapters if you want. Like if you're like, screw this, I don't want to support this guy, there's free chapters you can get on Bushido of Bitcoin.com. There's a really cool trailer which I recommend people watch,
Mhm.
which is about the book.
It was
I
intense.
mean, it's very intense. I know. There's a less intense one called "Beauty Will Save the World." It's got like some classical music in it, so
Love
I'll share
that.
that with you as well.
Oh, well,
Um,
I love that
and
you dig into all these themes because I think it's important. Debate is healthy, and exposing yourself to things you might not agree with is also really healthy too.
yeah, I know the book will challenge people. That's a given, and that's why I wrote it. And in fact, it was a thing that when I set out to write it, I was writing a completely different book. I was writing about the emergent values in the Bitcoin space, or the emergent virtues in the Bitcoin space. That's where the name Bushido Bitcoin came from. But the book, like, that meme where the guy's like turns the car at like the
Oh
last
yeah,
second.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
basically what happened with the book. Like it just transformed into something else. And like I discovered this book and it came through me. It wasn't something that I set out to write, which to me is very special, and it points to something true because it forced me to really change all of my beliefs around like how
Mhm.
Bitcoin's going to help. And I have not given up on that, as I said, but I realized that Bitcoin's more like the keystone to the bridge, but the keystone alone is not enough, like
Yeah,
because you need the rest of the bridge. And this book is about the rest of the bridge. And you could call the Bitcoin Standard, for example, Saifedean's book, as the keystone. You put that together, we have a bridge to a new world.
I love that. That's a great note to end it on. Thanks so much, Alex. It's great to see you. I hope you're living a beautiful life in Brazil. Say hello to your beautiful wife, and hopefully, I'll see you in person soon.
I will. Thank you, Nat.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Coin Stories. Make sure you're subscribed to the show and hit that notifications button so you never miss any new content. Also, check out our weekly free newsletter at thenewsblock.substack.com. This show is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Nothing should constitute as investment advice, and you should always do your own research. I'm always open to feedback and guest suggestions, so please feel free to reach out at info@talkingbitcoin.com. I'll see you next time.